The pens at Hold Carron were the last warm place a drake came to before the cold took the rest of him, and I had kept them for 31 winters without anyone above me learning my name. That suited me. A feed hand is a pair of hands and a bucket and a back that hasn't given out yet. The wing captains came and went in their black harness, and the quartermasters came and went with their slates, and the great drakes of the Dominion roared out of the upper bays on their way to wars I never saw the end of, and through all of it I shoveled, and I filled, and I latched the gates, and I did not expect to be remembered, because remembering is for men who matter, and I had made my peace with not being one of them a long time before. The pens ran in 2 long rows under a roof of iron slats, and the daylight came down through those slats in hard, pale bars, so that a drake lying in his straw lay half in light and half in shadow all the morning long. The upper pens held the serving drakes, the young warwings still on the roll, fed by ration and counted twice a day. The lower pens, past the turn where the floor sloped down into ash mud, held the others. We did not have a clean word for the others. The slate called them struck. The wingmen called them spent. I called them, in my own head where no one could fault me for it, the ones still breathing. Because that was the thing the slate would not say. A drake struck off the war roll was, by the reckoning of the court, already gone. His number was drawn through with a single line. His rations were stopped. His name, and they all had names, war names, great heavy names earned in fire. His name was lifted out of the roll and not spoken again, as though speaking it would put a weight back on a scale that the court had decided to balance by taking him off it. A drake who could not fly could not serve, and a drake who could not serve was a cost, and the Dominion did not keep costs. They were given back to the mountain, which was the phrase we used so we would not have to use the other one. In practice, it meant the lower pens. It meant a struck drake was led down past the turn and put behind the last iron gate and not fed, and in a week or 2, sometimes 3 if he was stubborn, the cold and the hunger finished the work the war had started, and then I cleared the pen and washed it down and we waited for the next one. I had cleared a great many pens. The one I want to tell you about came down to the last gate in the dead middle of a winter, so hard the feed froze in the bucket between the store and the trough. They brought him down on a drag sledge because he could not walk well, 4 penmen hauling, and a wing corporal walking ahead with the slate, and I stood back against the wall the way you do when your betters are working, and watched them put him behind the iron. He was a big one. Even folded down and burned, he was bigger than any drake I had on the upper row, slate dark in his good scales and gray-white where the fire had taken him, which was most of one side. His left wing was the worst of it. It had been a wing once, a real wing, and now it was a black ruin of stub and seared membrane, drawn up against his flank like a thing he was ashamed of, and where it dragged it left a smear in the ash mud that I would be cleaning for weeks. His horns were long and back-swept and notched from old fighting. One eye was clouded. The other was the color of a banked coal, and it watched the corporal cross his number off the slate with a flat patience that put a cold finger on the back of my neck, because it was not the patience of a beast. It was the patience of someone who understood exactly what the line through the number meant, and had decided not to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him mind. The corporal read the number out for his book. I will not repeat it. It was 3 figures and a letter the way they tag a war wing, and he said it once and drew the line, and that was the last time that number was a living thing as far as the Dominion was concerned. Then they latched the gate and took the sledge and went back up the slope, and the corporal said to me on his way past, not unkindly, "Leave that one be, old man. He's given back. No sense wasting feed on the mountain." "No sense at all," I said, "because that is what you say," and he went up the slope and out, and the daylight came down through the slats in its hard, pale bars, and I was alone in the lower pens with a drake the Dominion had finished counting. I should tell you I left him be. I should tell you I knew my place, which I did, and kept to it, which I had for 31 winters. I should tell you that a feed hand does not have feelings about the stock, because feelings are a luxury for men who can afford to lose, and I could not afford to lose a single day's wage, or the roof the wage bought me. But I had been clearing pens too long, and I had watched too many of them go behind the last gate and stop. And somewhere in those 31 winters, a thing had worn through in me the way the handle of a bucket wears through the skin of your palm until the skin gives up and grows back harder, except this had not grown back harder. It had grown back soft. I could not have told you when. I only knew that I stood at that gate in the freezing dark with the feed frozen in the store, and I looked at that banked coal eye watching me from the straw, and I thought, he is hungry, and there is feed not 40 feet behind me, and the only thing between the two is a line a man drew through a number. So I went and I broke the ice on the bucket with the butt of the shovel, and I carried it down past the turn, and I tipped it into the trough behind the last gate. He did not move for a long time. He watched me the way a soldier watches a thing he doesn't trust, looking for the trap in it. Drakes are not stupid. The serving ones learn the rhythm of the ration and the bell, and a struck one learns the rhythm of the empty trough, and this one had clearly learned it before, somewhere in some other hold, because the look he gave the feed was the look of a creature who has been taught that food behind the last gate is a mistake someone is about to come and correct. "It's yours," I said. My voice sounded strange to me. I did not talk much. There was no one to talk to in the lower pens. "Go on, no one's coming for it." He ate when I had gone back up to the wall, watching me sidelong the whole while, fast and graceless the way a starved thing eats. And when the trough was empty, he set his great scarred head down in the straw and let the clouded eye close and kept the coal eye on me until I left. That was the first night. I have thought since about how small a thing it was. A broken bucket of feed for a drake the world had already subtracted. If you had asked me that night whether it meant anything, I would have laughed at you, because it did not mean anything. It was just feed, and I was just a feed hand, and the line through his number was still there in the corporal's book where neither he nor I could reach it. But the trough was empty in the morning, and so I filled it again. I want to be honest about the shape of the thing, because if I tell it the way the wingmen tell their stories afterward, all at once, all glory, I will be lying, and he would not have wanted it lied about. It was not all at once. It was a winter of buckets. It went like this. Each morning before the bell I broke the ice and filled his trough, and each evening after the upper row was done and the penmen had gone up to their fires, I filled it again, and I carried the ash and the soiled straw out the low door and brought clean straw in, and at first he watched me do all of it with that coal eye and never moved and never made a sound. A struck drake learned silence. Sound is for the roll. The served drakes call and answer up and down the upper row, a low rolling speech I had heard for 31 winters and never understood a word of. The struck ones go quiet. I think it is grief, though I would not have used that word out loud about a beast in those days. I think a drake who has had his name lifted out of the roll stops speaking, because there is no longer anyone in the order who is permitted to answer him, and a creature built for that answering would rather be silent than call into a hold that has agreed not to hear. He was silent for a long time. The wing was what changed it. Past midwinter the burned membrane began to rot at the edge, the way a deep burn will if it is left, and the smell of it came up sharp under the cold, and I knew it would kill him faster than the hunger ever would, and slower and worse. I was not a healer. I had no business with it, but I had cleaned a great many wounds on a great many beasts over 31 winters, and there was a barrel of gray salve in the store that the upper row men used on harness galls. And one evening I took a double handful of it and a rag, and I opened the last gate and stepped inside, which a feed hand has no business doing, and I knelt down in the ash mud beside that ruined wing. He could have killed me. I want that understood. A war drake, even burned, even starved, could have taken my head off with a turn of that scarred neck, and no one in the Dominion would have so much as noted it. A feed hand who goes into a struck pen and dies there has only himself to blame. He turned his head and the coal eye came around and looked at me from a hand's breadth away, and I felt the heat of his breath, and I held still with my handful of gray salve and said the only true thing I had. "That's going to rot and take you the hard way," I said. I can put this on it, it'll sting, then it might not. And I do not know what he understood of the words. But he understood the salve, and he understood the rag, and he understood, I think, the simple fact of a creature at the bottom of the order kneeling in the muck beside him with no reason to and nothing to gain. And after a long moment he turned his head away from me and laid it down flat in the straw and gave me the wing. It did sting. He flinched and a sound came out of him, low, the first sound I had heard him make, and it was not a roar. It was the small grinding note a man makes through his teeth when he means not to cry out and almost manages it. I worked the salve into the rotting edge as gently as my old hands could, and I talked the whole time, low and steady, the way you talk to any hurt thing about nothing, about the cold and the feed and the state of the straw, and he lay there and let me. And when I was done and had backed out and latched the gate, he turned that coal eye on me through the iron and held it there until the dark took the pen. I dressed the wing every evening after that. It did not heal, a thing like that does not heal, not into a wing again, but it stopped rotting, and the smell went, and the gray-white seared scales over his ribs hardened clean instead of weeping, and somewhere in there, in the dressing and the buckets and the low talking, the silence between us turned into a different kind of silence. Not the silence of a struck drake who has agreed to stop calling. The silence of two who do not need to. I named him in the second month. It was not a war name. I had no right to a war name and would not have known one if it bit me. I named him for the look of him in the morning light, when the pale bars came down through the slats and lay across the gray-white burn so that it caught the light like cold coals. I called him Cinder. I said it to him the first time half laughing at myself, an old fool in a muck pen giving a name to a drake the court had unnamed. Cinder, I said, there, now you've got one again. Mine's not on any roll either, so we're square. He lifted his great scarred head out of the straw and he looked at me, and from somewhere deep in that burned chest came a sound I had not heard from him, not the grinding note of pain, but a low, long roll, soft. The speech of the upper row turned down to almost nothing, pitched for one listener and no farther. I did not know the word. I have never known their words. But I knew it was meant for me, and that he had spent it on a feed hand, and I had to turn around and busy myself with the bucket for a while before my eyes would behave. The trouble came up the slope, the way trouble does on a slate. The quartermaster who kept the feed book was a careful man named Velorin, and a careful man with a book will, sooner or later, notice that the store is going down faster than the roll says it should. He came down to the lower pens himself one gray afternoon, which the quartermaster never did, and he stood at the turn where the floor sloped into the ash mud, and he looked down the row to the last gate where Cinder lay in his clean straw with his dressed wing, and he looked at the empty trough that should by every rule of the Dominion have been bone dry and gathering dust, and then he looked at me. He struck, Velorin said. It was not a question. He is, I said. His ration stopped, 2 months stopped by the book. He tapped the slate against his leg. And my store's 2 months short. You want to explain to me how a struck drake with no ration has the look of a beast that's eaten every day since midwinter. I could have lied. I had 2 months of practice at the quiet of the lower pens, and I might have managed it. But I was 68 years old and tired in my bones, and the line through Cinder's number had sat wrong with me since the night they drew it, and standing there, I found I did not have a lie in me worth the trouble. I've been feeding him, I said. Velorin was quiet for a moment. He was not a cruel man. The Dominion did not run on cruel men, it ran on careful ones, which is worse and easier to live with. You know what he is, he said. You know what feeding him is. That's stores, Roe, that's stores given back to the mountain, which is the same as throwing it off the wall. You'll answer for every bucket. I'll answer for them, I said. You'll answer for them to the wing captain, he said, and the wing captain will dock it from a wage you haven't got, and when there's no wage left to dock, he'll put you off the hold, and then who feeds you, old man? You'll be the next thing the mountain takes. He shook his head, and I saw that he was not threatening me. He was something close to grieving in his careful quartermaster's way at the arithmetic of it. It's a kindness wasted. He's a dead beast eating live stores. The line's been drawn. You can't undraw a line. And here is the thing I have turned over in my mind every day since. The thing I think the wingmen miss when they tell it all glory. I did not have an answer for him. He was right. By every reckoning the Dominion kept, he was entirely right. The line had been drawn. The number was crossed. The stores were real, and the wage was real, and the wall was real, and I was an old man with nothing to set against any of it but a bucket and a stubbornness I could not have defended to a single soul in that hold. So I said the only thing I had, which was not an argument, only a fact. He was hungry, I said, and there was feed. That's all I know about it, Velorin. I'm sorry about the store. But a thing that's hungry, you feed it if you can. That's not a rule I learned anywhere. I just never found the bottom of it. Velorin looked at me a long moment. Then he looked down the row at Cinder, who had lifted his head and was watching us both with the coal eye, silent, taking the measure of the man with the slate the way he had once taken the measure of me. And something moved in the quartermaster's careful face that I had not expected, and that I have been grateful for ever since. I came down here to find a thief, he said at last low, and I find an old man and a dead beast keeping each other company against the whole weight of the Dominion. He tapped the slate against his leg again, twice, slow. I'll carry the shortage 3 more weeks in my own book before I have to take it up. 3 weeks, Ro. I can lose 3 weeks in a winter store. After that the wing captain sees it, and it's out of my hands and yours both. Why? I said, because I had to know. He was quiet. Then he said, because my father was a feed hand, and he turned and went back up the slope and did not come down to the lower pens again. 3 weeks. I want to tell you that I used them to plan something, to scheme some way to get Cinder out, to be the kind of man the stories are about. But there was nothing to plan. A feed hand cannot smuggle a wardrake off a hold. There is no hole in the wall the size of a thing like that. All I could do with 3 weeks was what I had done with 2 months, which was fill the trough, and dress the wing, and kneel in the ash mud in the pale light, and talk to him low about the cold and the feed and the state of the straw, and not think about the 4th week. So that is what I did. And it was in the 3rd of those 3 weeks, with the count running out under me like sand and nothing in my hands to stop it, that the upper bays began to roar. I had heard the bays roar 1,000 times, wings going out, wings coming in. But this was different. This went on. It built and built through a whole afternoon, drake after drake coming down out of the cold sky into the upper bays, and the ground shook with the weight of them landing, and the speech of the upper row rose into something I had never heard in 31 winters, a great rolling storm of drake voices answering and answering, until the iron slats of the roof hummed with it. The penmen ran up the slope and did not come back. The whole hold turned its face to the bays. A wing had come home. I learned the rest of it later in pieces. The 9th wing of the Ember Throne. 3 years gone into a war at the cold edge of the Dominion's reach. 3 years given up for lost by everyone but the court, which never quite says lost out loud. The 9th wing had come home, and it had come home with its king. I did not go up to see it. A feed hand does not gawk at his betters. I stayed in the lower pens and I filled Cinder's trough, because the bell would not ring for him no matter who had come home, and I will tell you that the great rolling speech from the upper row did something to him I had not seen before. He had gone to the gate. He was up off his straw and at the iron with his good wing half spread and his burned one dragging, his whole scarred body turned up the slope toward the sound, and the coal eye was wide, and from his chest came a sound that broke my heart, a call, the full call, the upper row speech at its full pitch, flung up the slope toward the bays with everything left in him. And no one answered. The storm of voices rolled on above, drake to drake, the whole homecoming of a wing, and not one note of it turned down the slope to the last gate where a struck drake stood at the iron, and called into a hold that had agreed not to hear him. He called until the call cracked. Then he stopped and stood there with his head against the cold iron, and the great rolling speech went on above us without him in it. And I came and stood at the gate with my hand flat against the bars near his scarred jaw, and I did not have one word in me worth saying. So I said none, and we stood there together while the ninth wing came home to everyone in the hold but him. I do not know how the Drake King heard of it. I have thought about it. A quartermaster's book, a wing corporal's idle word, a penman's gossip carried up to the fires, somewhere in the homecoming and all that noise. A small fact moved up the order the way a small fact will, that there was a burned Drake in the lower pens, struck off the roll a season past, who an old feed hand had been keeping alive on stolen feed against every rule of the Dominion. It is the kind of fact that means nothing to almost everyone. To one listener it meant everything. He came down the slope the next morning. I knew it was someone before I saw him, because the penmen scattered out of the lower pens like leaves, and the daylight in the slats seemed to go still, and then he came around the turn into the lower row, and I understood. In the old way the body understands a thing before the mind catches up, that I was looking at the top of the whole order, the thing all the lines and numbers and rolls finally pointed at. The Drake King Corvin was not large the way Cinder was large. He was large the way a mountain is large, so that your eye could not take all of him at once. His scales were the deep red-black of a forge at rest, and they moved with a light that had nothing to do with the pale bars from the slats. He carried his own light, banked low. The way a great fire banked low is more frightening than one roaring. His horns swept up and back and were ringed with age. Behind him, filling the slope dark against the cold sky in the high doorway, the ninth wing waited, a dozen war drakes, scarred and silent, watching their king go down among the struck pens, and not one of them set a claw past the turn. I went down on one knee in the ash mud, which is what you do, and I put my eyes on the ground, which is what you do, and I waited to be told what my crime was and what it would cost me, and I found that I was not as afraid as I should have been, because the thing I had been afraid of for 3 weeks was already coming, and a man who has been waiting for the 4th week is almost glad when it finally arrives. The Drake King did not look at me. He went past me as though I were a post, and he went to the last gate, and he stood before the iron, and he looked at the burned Drake in the clean straw, and Cinder looked back at him. I want to tell this part right. Cinder did not call. He had spent his calling the day before into the homecoming and got nothing back, and he did not spend it again. He rose up off the straw slow, the way the burned body let him, and he stood as straight as the ruined wing would let him stand, and he faced the Drake King through the iron with the coal eye steady, and he held himself. There is no other word for it. He held himself like a soldier at the inspection of his king, burned and struck and unfed and unnamed by the roll, holding the line of his old discipline because it was the last thing of his own that no one had been able to take off the slate. And the Drake King spoke to him. Low, the upper row speech, but slow, every note set down with weight, the way you speak a thing that matters. And Cinder answered, just as low. And what passed between them in that speech I have never known and will never know, because it was theirs and not mine, the speech of the roll into which a feed hand was never going to be admitted. But I knelt in the muck, and I watched a Drake King and a struck Drake speak to each other through an iron gate as equals, 2 old soldiers of the same fire, and I understood that whatever Cinder had been before the burn, before the line through his number, he had been something to this king. A wingmate, a shield, a name the king had carried 3 years into a war and come home still carrying, while the court that served that king had quietly lifted the same name off its books to balance a column. When the speaking was done, the Drake King turned at last and looked at me. I kept my eyes down. The banked light of him fell over me, and I felt the heat of it, and I waited. "Old man," he said, and his voice in the common tongue was a deep grinding thing, shaped for a mouth that was not built for our words, slow and terrible and clear. "They tell me you fed a dead drake all winter on stolen stores. They tell me you will answer for it to the wall." "I will, Lord," I said to the ground. "Why?" It was the same word Velorin had asked me, and I gave it the same answer because in 3 weeks I had not found a better one, and I do not think there is a better one. He was hungry, I said, and there was feed. I never found the bottom of that, Lord. I'm sorry about the stores, but a thing that's hungry, if you can, you feed it. That's all I ever knew about it. The lower pens were very quiet. Above us, on the slope, the ninth wing did not move. I knelt in the ash mud and waited to learn what a feed hand's life was worth set against a winter of stolen stores, which I had always understood to be nothing, and had made my peace with being nothing, a long time ago. "Look at me," the Drake King said. I lifted my eyes. I had not looked a thing like him in the face before, and I do not expect to again. The banked light of him, the rings on the great horns, the eyes, both of his eyes were the color of the coal in Cinder's good one. And I understood that too then, something about the fire they were all carrying, king and wing and the struck Drake alike, the same fire down the whole length of the order from the throne to the last gate, and a line drawn through a number had not put it out in the one any more than it had in the others. "My court keeps a roll," the Drake King said, slow, "and the roll is how we count what we have, so that we do not spend what we cannot spare. It is a good roll. It has kept this dominion through wars your short life cannot imagine." He turned his great head toward the last gate, toward Cinder standing straight in his clean straw. "And it told me that Vale Koth of the ninth wing, who held the cold breach at Anhull for 2 days on a broken wing so that I and 40 others could lift away alive, was a cost. It drew a line through him while I was 3 years gone, and it stopped his feed, and it set him here behind iron to be given back to the mountain, and it did all of this correctly by every rule we keep." The banked light of him seemed to gather. "The roll was correct, old man, and the roll was wrong. Both. And no one in all my dominion, not one captain, not one quartermaster, not one of the wing I built, no one saw the wrong in it. Only a feed hand with no name on any book, who could not read the roll, and so could only see the Drake." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, which I have found is usually the right thing for a feed hand to do. "Vale Koth," the Drake King said, and he said the war name into the lower pens, full and clear, the name the court had lifted out and not spoken, and I saw Cinder's whole scarred body change at the sound of it, the way a struck thing changes when its name is set back on the scale. "His name returns to the roll this hour. His feed is restored. His pen is restored. And there is a thing more, old man, that I will do that has not been done in my reign." He turned that terrible cold gaze full on me. "I will not bow to you," the Drake King said. "A king does not bow, and you would not thank me for the show of it. I have watched you all winter through one Drake's eye, and I know you are not a man who wants kneeling. So I will do the thing you understand instead." And he lowered his great horned head, not to the ground, not in a bow, but down to the trough at the last gate, the same iron trough I had filled twice a day all the dead cold winter, and he ate from it. The Drake King of the Ember Throne ate a king's mouthful from a feed hand's trough, the stolen store's trough, the trough that was the only thing I had ever had to set against the whole weight of the Dominion. And when he lifted his head he said, so that the whole silent ninth wing on the slope above could hear it, "This trough has fed the roll, let it be entered so." And that was all. He turned and went back up the slope, and the ninth wing parted for him, and Cinder Vale Koth stood at the open gate they unlatched for him and watched his king go, and then turned the coal eye down the row to me, kneeling there in the muck with my empty bucket, and made the low soft sound he had made the day I named him, the one pitched for one listener and no farther. They did not make me a hero. I want you to know that because the wingmen tell it as though they did, and it is not true, and it would have been the wrong thing. I was a feed hand. I went on being a feed hand. But there was a line entered in the quartermaster's book in Velorin's careful hand. I saw it once, the only line in any roll of the Dominion with my name on it. That read, "The trough at the last gate keeps to the roll, by order of the throne." And after that the feed for the lower pens was never short again, and no struck Drake came down past the turn to be given back to the mountain while I kept the pens. because the order had quietly changed above me in a way no one ever explained, and I never asked about. Vale Koth could not fly again. A burned wing does not become a wing, but a war drake who cannot fly can still stand at a gate in the morning light with his name back on the roll, and he did, for the rest of my years there, in the first pen now instead of the last, and the daylight came down through the slats in its hard pale bars across the gray-white burn so it caught the light like cold coals, and I filled his trough at the bell with the others, by ration, by right, counted twice a day. I am too old to keep the pens now. A younger man breaks the ice in the mornings. But I go down sometimes, when my legs allow it, and I stand at the first gate, and the old drake lifts his great scarred head out of the straw, and we keep each other the silent kind of company, the kind that does not need the speech of any roll. And I think about the line a man drew through a #1 cold night, and how the only thing in all the Dominion strong enough to undraw it was a bucket of feed and an old fool who never found the bottom of a hungry thing. The mountain takes us all in the end. I have no quarrel with that. It is the one count no roll can argue with. But I have learned this much, kneeling 31 winters in the ash mud, and I will set it down here for whoever clears my pen when it comes my turn. There is no creature so far above you that your kindness cannot reach it, and none so struck and crossed and given back that it is not still, under the burn, a living thing, and a living thing, if you can, you feed. I never found the bottom of that. I do not expect to.